Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our spring herbicide savings event training webinar. My name is Liz Dunbar. I am the Product and Marketing Manager for the Greenhouse and Nursery portfolio here at BASF. Thank you for spending the time this afternoon with us. We've got a full webinar of topics here, so we will do a quick housekeeping check-in. I will run through our program overview, and then I'll turn it over to Kyle Miller for some technical training. We'll have a Q&A function at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A functionality of the webinar. This meeting will be recorded, so we will have the recording available for anyone who is unable to make it, or if you'd like to share this training with anybody on your team. It'll go through our Better Plants website. So if you are not receiving our Better Plants eBlasts monthly subscription, feel free to scan the QR code on your screen to subscribe. And then if you still don't see those come through, we have our team will be armed with the recording as well. So you can follow up with your BASF representative directly if you so prefer that. Again, the Q&A functionality is available through the Teams webinar platform, or you can drop a question in the chat and we will moderate all of those questions at the end. And with that, I will briefly run through the program details for our inaugural 2024 Spring Herbicide Savings Event. So this program is going to run March 1 through April 30th of 24. It is an end user off invoice discount, and it's about 5% off on all qualifying products, which I'll cover in the next slide. Terms are through July 29th, so nice long extended terms for this program. And here is your lineup of qualifying products. So you'll see freehand herbicide, pendulum aquacap, and tower herbicide. So why buy during the spring herbicide savings event? We wanted to be laser focused this time of year and structure a program with herbicides at the time that they are most popularly applied and keeping that consistent discount off invoice program structure. So you guys get to realize instant savings off the bottom line. And it's a great time to save overall on our lineup of pre-emergent herbicides. And so with that, I will turn it over to Kyle Miller. So Kyle Miller is our Senior Technical Specialist for BASF Turf and Ornamental Group. He is in the northeastern region of the United States, and Kyle's responsible for bringing new products to market, discovering market opportunities for existing products, providing trainings like this to distributors and end user customers, as well as preparing some technical sales material in support of our various field teams. Kyle has a Bachelor of Science degree from Virginia Tech and a Master's of Science degree from Auburn University in turfgrass science. He has been with BASF for over 30 years. So enjoy the training, ask the questions. You've certainly got an expert in the room. And with that, Kyle, take it away.
Thank you, Liz. Love talking about weeds. And to start us off, I think we need to make sure that we're all comfortable with the kinds of weeds that we're trying to control out there. If you don't know what you're trying to control, it's awfully hard to pick a herbicide to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a little quiz here on some of the top weeds that we have in turf, that we have in ornamentals. And we're going to start off with this one right here. This is probably the most common one that we run into just about everywhere. This happens to be crabgrass. Some people call it soft crabgrass, but definitely one of the tougher weeds that we deal with just because it is going to come back year after year after year, and we need to make sure that we have a pre-emergent down to control it. Secondly, this one is a winter annual, crabgrass being a summer annual. This one is one that is very difficult to control because it's a heavy cedar. It germinates in the fall of the year, so we'll see it all winter long. This happens to be annual bluegrass, or what we call poannua. Everybody is probably familiar with this one. Next, we have one that has that milky white sap when you break the stem. It grows very low to the ground. We see it in turf. We see it in ornamentals. There are many different kinds of this particular weed. This happens to be prostrate spurge, but there are several different spurges. and some of the BASF portfolio is really good on spurge control. This right here is a weed that I recently heard from one of our ornamental sales reps, and Mindy basically said, Kyle, all of my growers have been putting down pre-emergence, and they say they've got this weed everywhere, and they don't understand why. Is there a resistance issue with some of the herbicides to this weed? And the answer is no. It's just one that's very, very difficult to control. Hairy bittercress, another winter annual that you need to make sure that your timing is proper in the fall of the year in order to get good control going into the winter and during the spring months. This weed here, another winter annual. It's got a cousin, and this happens to be chickweed, common chickweed. There's also mouse ear chickweed, which looks somewhat similar. Leaves are a little bit larger on mouse ear, and you've got hairy leaves that really distinguish it from common chickweed. This is a perennial weed that we see many, many times. It's difficult to control because a lot of our pre-emergents wouldn't work on this being a perennial. We can control the seeds, but we can't control those plants that are there year after year after year because it's coming back from a rootstock. This is not Canadian thistle. This is Canada thistle. So make sure you get the name of it correct. This weed everybody's familiar with, grows in wet locations and especially in turf and ornamentals and container nursery stock where we're watering frequently. You're going to see this weed just about everywhere. This happens to be yellow nutsedge, but you're familiar with other sedges, annual sedge, kalingas, purple nutsedge, that, like I said, are very prevalent under wet conditions. This is not yellow clover. This is another winter annual weed, and this happens to be oxalis, or what we call yellow wood sorrel, prolific cedar. We see it in late spring and during the summer months, and one that is just very, very common in many situations in turf and in ornamental situations. So, like I said, I think it's just important to once again recognize the weeds that we're going after, because what we want to be able to do is cross-reference the weeds that we're trying to control and some of the products that we might have to control them with. There are a number of references out there that are really good for weed control. And so if you can properly identify that weed, it makes it a lot easier to pick and choose which product to use. Here you've got spotted spurge and a list of products that work good or poor or fair, depending on the activity. And then you see here down south, we've got Eclipta, which is a real problem in a lot of situations. Not many choices for Eclipta control, but once again, if you can properly identify it, it really helps with choosing what herbicide to use. Now, one of the interesting things about pre-emergence, and that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about pendulum aquacap, we're talking about tower, and we're talking about freehand. Those are all three pre-emergent control products. Understand this, pre-emergents do not control weed seeds. They control emerging weeds. So in other words, really, they shouldn't be called pre-emergent probably. They should be probably called early post-emergent products. Because what happens is when you put a pre-emergent herbicide down, we will see it in the top inch or two of the soil profile. And what ends up happening is most of these products are what we call root active products. When that initial root begins to come out of that weed seed, it's going to come in contact with the herbicide, and that herbicide is going to stop further growth and keep that weed from developing. And so that weed will end up dying. Or if that herbicide is a pre-emergent that is a shoot active material, the same thing's going to happen. When that first initial shoot comes in contact with the herbicide in the soil, it's going to keep it from growing, stop it, and that weed will end up dying. And then you'll really never see it visually on the surface a lot of times. Sometimes you will, sometimes you might not. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood how these pre-emergent products really work. Now, here's something that I wanted to share with you. We do this in turf grass situations quite a bit, and that is splitting our herbicide or our pre-emergence applications. On the left, you see an example where we're going to apply 3 quarts per acre, a full rate of a pre-emergence herbicide. And then over time, that herbicide decreases in the soil till it reaches that orange line that you see there. That's our threshold level. And after that point, we could potentially get weed germination because there's not enough herbicide in the soil to control those weeds, okay? So if we put out a full rate of a pre-emergence herbicide, and let's say it's going to last approximately 10 weeks, as you see here. If we put that same 3 quart per acre rate out in 2 applications, guess what happens? That degradation curve lasts longer. In other words, if you split those rates, put out half initially, and then at about 6 weeks, when we're reaching that threshold level, make a second application of the remainder, so another 1.5 quarts for a total of 3 quarts. What we see is that herbicide is in the soil, lasts in the soil longer at that threshold level than if we made 1 full rate application. So this is a way for us to extend the length of residual control that we get from pre-emergence herbicides. I hope that all makes sense to you. You might not think that it would make sense, being that 3 quarts per acre is 3 quarts per acre, whether it's 1.5 plus 1.5 or a total of 3. But like I said, this is very real, and we do see that extended control when we split the application. All right, let's talk a little bit about these products. The first one that I want to lead off with is Pendulum Aquacap. This active ingredient is pendimethalin, and I actually worked for the company that discovered pendimethalin, and this product has been around for over 40 years. So it's got a long history and a long history of being a very, very good performer. What's happened over the years has been that the formulation has been improved, and now we have a micro-encapsulated version, what we call Aquacap. It's got about 40 different weeds on the label that it's very effective on. It works in turf grass systems and in nursery production. And this new formulation that we have that's micro-encapsulated, or what we call a capsule suspension, has reduced potential for staining. And since it's water-based, really no smell, so virtually no odor. And then from a handling and a mixing standpoint, because there's this polymer capsule around it, it sort of protects the active ingredient from the handler, mixer, loader. And so that's the reason that we have a lot less potential for staining. Excellent crop safety in turf grasses, all the warm season turf grasses, all the cool season turf grasses, and a huge number of ornamental species that are tolerant to this herbicide. Now, let's talk about turf first. In the golf segment, we see Pendulum Aquacap used a lot in these native areas. And the reason is because AquaCap was designed for no-till farming, so it can go through all that heavy trash and foliage and stubble that might be on the ground and get down to the soil where the weeds are. So it's very effective at penetrating all the organic matter and getting to the target. So in native areas on the golf course, it works very, very well. But we can also use it in container nursery stock, in field-grown nursery stock. We can use it on lawns, athletic fields, anywhere that we need a pre-emergent herbicide. So I mentioned it was a capsule suspension. So think about that yellow portion being the active ingredient, and then that blue portion is that polymer capsule that envelops the active ingredient. So it's, quote, protected. And what ends up happening is when you put this product into your sprayer, those capsules remain intact. When we spray it out, even going through those very, very small nozzles, it remains intact, and it goes down, penetrates the surface, and works its way down to the soil. And the way that it does that is, obviously, when we get a rain event, and then we get some cooling and heating and drying and wetting, that capsule will crack and release itself very shortly after the application down into the soil. So that's fundamentally how that product works in getting down to where it needs to be in order to control weeds. So that's a little bit about Pendulum AquaCap. Our next pre-emergent herbicide is Tower. This is also a liquid material and is very good on grasses like poa and goosegrass. It's good on a number of small seeded broadleaf weeds, and it also controls a lot of annual sedges like yellow nut sedge, and it also controls liverwort, which can be a problem in nursery situations. Very tolerant of many, many ornamentals, and we can go right over the top of many trees, shrubs, and ground covers, and some perennials also, and can make an excellent tank mix partner with other products. Now, in turf grass situations, doveweed is a real problem, and Tower is particularly good on doveweed to control that species in a turf grass environment. So if you're having trouble with doveweed, this might be a choice that you would want to use pre-emergently in order to control that particular weed. It's also a very, very good goosegrass product in turf grass situations. So those of you with athletic fields or golf courses where goosegrass is a particular problem, north and south, Tower can be a very, very effective material in giving you some excellent goosegrass control pre-emergently. Now let's talk a little bit about Freehand. This is our core product for ornamental weed control, but we can also use it in turf grass environments. 2 active ingredients. It is a granular formulation. It's on a clay granule, which is nice and dense, which spreads very, very well. It also controls grasses, broadleafs, and sedges. So it's got the 2 active ingredients that we just talked about, Pendulum and Tower in it. And it's also really good on some other weeds like the spurges that I mentioned earlier, Eclipta. I mentioned doveweed that Tower gets. Well, this Freehand product would also control that. And the nice thing about it is it's got a tremendous number of ornamental species on the list, so that we can go right over the top of many, many ornamentals in nursery stock, in the landscape, and we can actually also use this in turf grass situations. So over 80 different weeds, so you're combining Pendulum with Tower, and so you're marrying up 2 active ingredients to get a broader spectrum of weeds that we can control. This particular product can be used on warm season turf. It is not labeled for cool season turf, however, and as I mentioned, those two active ingredients that give you broader spectrum of weeds that you can control, and then also a nice long residual that this product will deliver in all sorts of situations. Now, in turf environments, freehand comes in real handy down south on grasses that are going to go dormant, especially where you've got poannua. That's a problem that comes in when warm season turf grasses begin to go dormant. A lot of superintendents are using this particular product in the fall of the year to get out before the poannua germinates, keep it clean all season long, and deliver some really high quality turf going into the spring of the year. So this is one of the ways that we've got turf grass managers using this particular product. Now, I mentioned that freehand was a granular. Those two active ingredients, we can also take them in their liquid form that I talked about earlier. And here you're looking at the rates because plenty of managers, both ornamentals and turf grass, would rather spray than spread. So what I'm doing here is giving you the rates for the tower and the pendulum aquacap that you would need to deliver equal to a freehand at 100, 150, or up to 200 pounds, which is the full rate for freehand. So you can either spray or you can spread these two products together. Now, in ornamentals, if you're spraying in a liquid program, we like to see that tower and pendulum, or what we call liquid freehand, used during the summer months. And the reason is because the weed spectrum that those two products have really lend itself to getting really good weed control during the summer months. I mentioned the sedges. It's very good pre-emergently on those. Those are summer weeds, so it just makes sense to use it during that time period. Also very good on spurges, which are a summer annual. So that is the timing to use or incorporate, I'm going to call it liquid freehand, in an ornamental situation during the middle of the summer. Now, if you're wanting to use freehand as a granule, then once again, the middle of the summer makes total sense one more time, and that is because of the weed spectrum that it controls. So start off with something like a snapshot product and with something like a Marengo product, but during the middle of the summer, use freehand to give you excellent control on those grassy weed species, on your broadleaves, and then on your sedge species, which can be a problem during the middle of the summer. Now, one product that's not on the program that we're talking about today, but I did want to mention, this is a newer product for BASF. It is Finale XL. It is a non-selective contact herbicide. And one of the things that you can do with this is tank mix it with a pre-emergent, a liquid pre-emergent that we're talking about today, pendulum aquacap or tower, to deliver post-emergent weed control, so knock down what's there, so kill any emerged weeds, and then deliver residual control. So anywhere that you want to do that, on the golf course, in a landscape bed, around a nursery, this product would work very, very nicely for that. It is an alternative to your glyphosate type products. But one of the really nice things about Finale XL is it has pinpoint accuracy. Wherever you spray it, that's all that it's going to control. So you see that one slide up in the top left that has an edging picture, if you will. You're only going to control what you put that spray on. So very precision edging, which is a nice feature to have with a product like this. We can also spray it on suckers at the base of specimen trees, for example, to keep those from sprouting. And the other nice thing too is much, much faster to work than something like glyphosate, even during cool weather. So we usually see activity within several days. And if it's cool outside, and you all have experienced this when you use glyphosate, it seems like it takes forever. It might take 2 or 3 weeks. This product, much, much faster. And for those of you that have greenhouses, we can use Finale XL in the greenhouse with plants present. So giving you a lot of flexibility with regard to what you can use to control weeds in those situations. Also, at the nursery, many of you all have nostoc, which is present because we're doing so much frequent watering there. It can be very slippery, dangerous to your workers. Take a look at this graph here where we had high percent ground cover of nostoc. We used Finale XL, which is the orange line, and we were able to drive the nostoc density down very, very quickly and very effectively over a prolonged period of time. So those of you that deal with that, this is a great option to use in those situations. The last thing that I want to talk about are some options for you when it comes to weed control in your landscape beds. Now, you're going to see a lot of products here that we use in turf, on the golf course, and lawns, and in the nursery. But what I wanted to share with those of you that do landscape weed control, I just wanted to take a look at some of the options that you have here. You've got a tremendous amount of sprayable options, and you see Pendulum AquaCap, or Tower listed as sprayable options. Then when we talk about granular options, we've got Pendulum 2G at BASF. We're not talking about that specifically today, but we've got that, and also Freehand. Now, when you're looking to control weeds, grassy weeds in ornamentals, you've got a number of things that you can use. Look at the label closely. At BASF, we have segment 2, which you can spray over broadleaf, many broadleaf ornamentals, and control grassy weed species like crabgrass or goosegrass or barnyard grass or foxtails, for example. So those are some of the options that you have in that particular situation so that you don't have to hand pull weeds. Now, this is the most difficult thing that we have with regard to weed control and ornamentals, and that is controlling a broadleaf weed and a broadleaf ornamental. We've got very few options. At BASF, we have Basagran that we can use over the top of a number of broadleaf ornamentals, but check the label. But anyway, at least these are some things that you can take a look at so that you don't have to hand weed in those situations. Sedges, if you have emerged sedges, here are some products that you can use to control them once they come up. Some of these you can use right over the top of some species of ornamental plants. Others you can use around the base. So like I said, consult the label. And then finally, you've got those non-selective options where you're going to go in there and spot spray weeds out. You don't want to get them on the foliage of the ornamentals. You've got things like Roundup, Finale XL that we talked about, and Diquat, which is another option. So those are what you can use as a non-selective control in ornamentals, but make sure you don't get it on the foliage or you're going to get some damage. Now, what you don't want to do is mulch almost 2 feet high in order to get weed control. This is not the answer to weed control. You can imagine the root system of these plants are very much smothered. I took this picture in a commercial parking lot, and this is not what we want to do. We've got some good herbicide options to use, obviously, but this is a question that I do get routinely about mulching, and that is, should I mulch or should I apply my pre-emergent, before I mulch or after I mulch? So we all know that as a rule, the weeds that we're trying to control are in the soil. So it makes most sense to actually put down your pre-emergent before you put the new mulch down. Usually weeds are not in the mulch, especially new fresh mulch. So put down your pre-emergent before you mulch so that you get the pre-emergent at the target closer to those weed seeds that you're ultimately trying to control. I hope that makes sense to you. And then I also get this question too is, okay, we're landscapers or we're putting in summer color at the golf course or wherever it might be. Now, do I want to apply my pre-emergent to the bedding plants before or after I mulch in those situations? And here, I usually follow the same rules that we did in that previous slide, but the most important thing to do is make sure after you put your bedding plants in, you water thoroughly. So all those air pockets are taken care of. So we don't have any potential channeling that can occur when we water, because what we don't want to happen is have a lot of open soil. We put down our pre-emergent, then we water in and move that pre-emergent in direct contact with the root system of those bedding plants and can potentially cause injury. So right after you put those plants in the ground, go ahead and water thoroughly so that it tightens up the soil around those the roots of the plants. And then that way you can put that pre-emergent down right before you mulch or even after you mulch. Not a huge deal. Okay, so with that, if there are any questions, I'll be glad to entertain those now. Liz, I don't know if anybody has sent anything in, but
Yes.
if so, we can move on to those.
We've got a couple of questions in the queue. Give me one. Oh, here we go. Lost my team's moved on me. So just wanted to quickly recap. I hope everybody enjoyed Kyle's training today and learned something. I know I do every time I hear one of his trainings, but program starts tomorrow. And remember, your qualifying products are many of the products that you heard during today's call: freehand granular herbicide, pendulum aquacap, and tower herbicide. And that's about a 5% discount off invoice. Moving over to the questions, I've got a couple coming in. Does aquacap encapsulation make the pendimethalin have a longer residual?
So the answer to that is not really, because what ends up happening is when that product is applied, and then, like I said, we get wetting and drying and heating and cooling, that capsule cracks pretty soon after the product is delivered down to the soil. So it's not a situation where it stays in that capsule for an extra several weeks before it releases. So we don't generally see extended weed control, even though pendulum aquacap, a good long residual pre-emergent herbicide that we can depend on for 10, 12 weeks, for example.
All right. And then does traffic like heavy walking or mowers affect the capsulation on aquacap?
The answer is really no to that. I mean, generally speaking, when we apply a pre-emergent, we're getting moisture on there afterwards. But if we do not, and you do walk on it, a lot of that product has dried on the foliage or either gotten down to the crown or gotten down to the mulch or wherever it might be, and is pretty tightly adsorbed. And we don't mind that we're cracking it at that point because we do want it to release and get down into the soil.
Okay, and then there was interest in one of the charts that you showed earlier on in your presentation, Kyle. Is that something we can share, or we can follow up? We can follow up later also.
Yeah, either one. Yeah, they can reach out. I'm not sure which one that is, but yeah, I'd be glad to discuss that.
Great. And then there's a question coming in about spray drones in our industry. Are we getting any closer to using them?
So the answer is, it seems like, Liz, every time I go to a new meeting or meet some new people, somebody's got a spray drone. Somebody's talking about spray drones. And the bottom line is we're working with the EPA to get spray drone language on the labels of products. So I expect this to continue to move forward. And so the answer is yes. I think in time we're going to see spray drones being utilized in, more and more in turf situations, athletic fields, golf courses, nurseries. I even heard of somebody applying a de-icer to get ice off greenhouse roofs recently. So yeah, there are just all these opportunities for spray drones out there, and I just feel like we're going to move in that direction.
Cool. Okay, and then do freezing temperatures affect liquid pre-emergence after being sufficiently watered in?
Do freezing temperatures affect the pre-emergent? What ends up happening is, remember that pre-emergents are degraded by microbial activity. So when it's real cold, they're not degrading. What's going to end up happening is they're just going to sit there. And a lot of times we see lawn care companies putting out pre-emergents in January, and people might say, wow, that's way too early. It's too, it's going to degrade, once springtime comes. But guess what? Because the weather's cold, it won't degrade because microbes aren't active. So it'll just be degrading once the soil temperatures get up. So really there's no effect with regard to freezing temperatures. It's just going to sit there.
Thank you for that one. Okay, so are any of the herbicides mentioned in this presentation, can they cause girdling around the stems of trees and shrubs?
We have not seen that. And, these things have been widely tested on ornamental after ornamental. And, a lot of times they're going right over the top of the ornamental. We can spray it right over the top of them. So they're coming in contact with that plant. And no, we don't see any of that kind of negative, impact on trees, shrubs, whatever it might be.
Okay. And then there's a question on freehand. So freehand was not recommended for cool season grasses or not labeled for it. Does it matter in beds?
So in beds, no, you can use it in your landscape beds freely. And two, what we saw with freehand was the reason it's not labeled for cool season turf was we saw when we made multiple applications, we saw a little bit of injury. But if you're applying it to a bed and you might get a little bit on the turf grass, that is no reason to be concerned because we've got tolerance for situations like that and it would not damage the turf.
All right. And then someone once tried to sell me on some pre-emergence activity for sedgehammer and even bazagran. Truth to either of those?
So pre-emergence, that would be a no. Those are both post-emergent products, and they need to come in contact with the foliage, and it's going to control what's there. They're not residual products that get into the soil like tower and impact the sedges from popping through. So the answer is no. Those are just post-emergent sedge herbicides.
All right. And then when it comes to pre-emergence in regards to how soon they should be watered in, what is the best approach?
So ideally, you might as well water them in after the application is made because we do need to get it down into the soil. That's where the weeds are. However, pre-emergence as a rule, these ones that we're talking about today, they can be stable on the soil surface for 2, 3, even up to 4 weeks. Now, we don't really want to do that, but they are very stable. You don't have to water them in immediately, but I would recommend that you do. And we've even got a lot of folks that will apply pre-emergence in the rain when it's a light mist because they can go out there, treat and do some work in the rain, if you will, and get the product down to the target because we want it in the soil. And so that's a perfect time to be doing that.
Wonderful. And then I think we've got one last question. You talked about controlling broadleaves in broadleaf crops. This is my biggest problem. Any suggestions on products to use?
Well, I think I outlined 3 or 4 choices on my list there, but I think probably the most important thing to do is make sure you're getting your pre-emergent down, these products that we're talking about today, before those weeds germinate. So if they're winter annuals, that would be in the fall of the year. If they're summer annuals, that would be in the spring of the year. So timing is everything with regard to trying to control those broadleaf weeds.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in, but we had a lot of really great engagement. So thank you for the time this afternoon. Thank you for the good questions. Like I said, this meeting will be recorded, so we'll be able to share this out with you. Please share with your teams, your customers, however you need to use the training, it's available for you. And we, on behalf of the entire team, we wish you a very successful spring season. Thank you.